Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. It's wonderful to see so many old friends and colleagues, and also quite a few new friends too. And this is wonderful. So thank you all for coming out. And what I'm going to try to do is impossible, but that's to try and give you a hint of what is in the book and the issues that are important. And it just can't be done in 15 or 20 minutes, but I'm going to compress as much as I can into that very short period of time. So I'm going to start with the money mafia, because it is the most urgent issue in the world today. It's not the most important. Global warming is the most important, but the money situation is the most urgent, because we have to do something to get people back to work, to get the economies going, and to have the financial flexibility to do something on the global warming front and other areas that need a lot of attention. The problem with the money situation is that there's only about one person in every 100 who really understands it. And there's some, we think of money in some esoteric way of we wishing, of course, we'd had more. But it's a little complex. And I'm going to skip over 3 or 4 issues that you can think about and take home with you when you start to read the book. As I say, 1 million young Canadians without jobs. And this is not right, it's not moral, but more important, it's not necessary. It's just as a result of a system which has grown up, which is designed to take us to the cleaners. And something can be done about it. Something must be done about it. So let's try to learn. What is money? Well, most people don't know. It used to be coins, silver, gold, copper, and some iron coins. But of course, we got too busy and too big to be able to do that. If you're going to buy a house, you can't take a bag of coins with you to pay for it. So we started using paper money. And at first it was backed by some coins or things, and later, of course, it wasn't. But over the years, the system has changed to the point where today, only about 3% of all money is either coins or paper. 97% is virtual. And virtual means computer entry. The first and probably the brightest of the governors of the Bank of Canada said that money was just a book entry. If he were alive today, he'd say money is just a computer entry. But the problem is, whose computers? And that's where we have to do something about it. We, the people, own the patent to create money. We have licensed private individuals to do it for us. And they now create 97% of all the money, but they create all of it as debt. And debt on which interest has to be paid, and no one creates any money with which to pay the interest, so you just keep going further and further and further into debt. The whole system is mathematically absurd. It's more insane than insane, if that's possible. Well, I want to just give you a bit of a background on the history of the way that the system is multiplied and what we call bank leverage. If we go back 300 years when the Bank of England rather, was chartered, they lent half of their money, or all of their capital, their gold and silver, to the king at 8%. So he gave them a license to print, P-R-I-N-T, an equal amount, and lend it to their rich friends at high interest rates. So in effect, they were allowed to lend the same capital twice. In the early days of the 20th century, U.S. federally chartered banks had to have a gold reserve of 25%, which meant they could lend the same money 4 times. When I was young, Canadian banks had to have a reserve of 8%, which meant they could lend the same money 12.5 times. Since then, the leverage has become even more generous, and since our Bank Act was changed in 1991, our banks were allowed to own assets equal to 20 times their capital, and that shows just how ridiculous the situation can get. To say that it's grand larceny is an understatement. But to understand, most people have the myth, observe the myth, that if you go to the bank to borrow money to buy a car, that what they're lending you is deposit that somebody else made the day before, or a couple of days before. Not so. They create the money. They're pretty well lent out all the time. So if you go in and say to buy a car for $35,000, and what they'll do is ask you for collateral, and if you have some stocks or bonds, okay, or failing that, you can give them a second mortgage on your house or your cottage, and if you can't do any of those things, you can get co-signature of a rich relative. And once they're satisfied with the collateral, then they'll have you sign a note for $35,000, repayable principal and interest at prime plus 2 or 3%, depending on the color of your eyes. And as soon as they're satisfied, they tap their computer, and $35,000 appears in your account that you can go out and spend. Seconds earlier, that money did not exist. It was created out of thin air, just based on a little bit of capital equal to the minimum required under the law. And a better example that I'll give you, and the reason I picked the title of this is you've been following the investigation going on in Montreal about the mafia there, and they're creaming about 2.5% off the top of all the construction jobs in the city. Well, what the banks do is take 95% off the top. That's what they do. So, let's say you're a student and you borrow $50,000 from the bank to get through your studies and graduate. The banks have in their vaults, or they have capital equal to $2,500 of what I call blood, sweat, and tears money. Real money that they had to work for. All of the rest is just notional money. So they lend a student $50,000. The student has to repay $50,000 blood, sweat, and tears money plus interest to repay a loan that was made on the basis of the bank's capital of $2,500. Now that's how ridiculous it is. So that this is the system that has to be changed, and there's only one way to do it, and that is to have some government-created money. I know there's a lot of controversy about it, but there is no other way, mathematically, because we have to have some money that is not debt to dilute the debt and get the economy going, and then be able to keep it going once we get it going. So, unfortunately, well, let me tell you first of all that I know that system works because I'm a child of the Depression, as you can probably tell by looking at me. And in 1938, there were no jobs in Canada, none. So in 1939, the war came along, and pretty soon, everybody was either in the armed forces or working on munitions or building factories or ships or something, and we had full employment. And you say, well, where did they get the money? Well, it was simple. The Bank of Canada printed it and made it available, not all of it, but available, a lot of it, to the government of Canada to spend into circulation, which is what the economists used to call high-powered money, which then allowed the bankers to increase their lending too. But a big chunk of the money that was created directly for the government at, in effect, zero cost, or very near zero cost. That was the system that we had from 1939 to 1974. It worked like a charm. It helped finance the war and all the post-war years, the St. Lawrence Seaway, the Trans-Canada Highway, the big new airport terminals, and to lay the foundation for our excellent Social Security system, one of the best in the world. Then in 1974, the Bank of Canada changed the system without consulting or even telling the government. They started taking their orders from the Bank for International Settlements in Zurich, Switzerland. How many of you have heard of that? Well, most of you have. This is a very informed audience. And the Bank for International Settlements said, we're going to follow monetarism, high leverage, in effect, no controls over the banks to speak of, and we require that you stop lending money to governments at low interest rates. And so it did. And we had to borrow in the market, and pay market rates. So we had a couple of recessions. We went into debt. We had to borrow. And as a result of that borrowing, we have paid $1,100 billion in interest since 1974, none of it which was necessary, none. And just think what it could have done for urban transportation, getting down the Gardner, you know, whatever. And that's $1 trillion, not a billion, you know, it's not even 100 billion, it's a trillion. So the system has got to be changed. Now, the problem arises at the moment. Our government is in the process of signing a treaty with the European Union, under which they are effectively going to give away the people's right to do that, to create our own money, even though we own the right. They're going to allow European banks to sue us if we do anything like starting to create some of our own money, and I'm recommending 34% of all new money to be government-created money. If we started doing that, the European banks would be able to sue us to the extent that we wouldn't be able to do it. In other words, we'd be bound in our miseries and never be able to get out of it. So I say, if the government signs that treaty with the EU, with its present financial provisions in it, that is high treason. I really believe it. So this is not a partisan issue. It doesn't matter how you vote or what you think. But if you care about the future at all, if you care about your country, and if you want to see the problem solved, write the Prime Minister, send him a telegram. Well, we don't do that anymore, do we?
Email.
Giving away my age. Send him an email, send him a letter, phone him if you know him, and say, please do not sign that treaty with the EU, because it is all part of something bigger that's going on in the world, and that is to take away power from the people and give it to multinational corporations and banks who are under the control of what I call the cabal. And this is part of a grander scheme. And the first Canada-US trade agreement was the first level, the first bit of this. But what's being done now with the proposed European treaty and the Trans-Pacific partnership are both huge, huge jumps into taking power away from the people and giving it to transnational corporations and their bosses, the banking cartel and the cabal. So we have got a problem on our hands, and we've got to do something about it before it's too late. Giving away our constitutional rights. No one has the right to do that. So please try to do something. Tell people, get the information flowing into Ottawa not to do it. Now this is being engineered, as I said, by an international cabal. Now what is a cabal? It's hard to define. But a hint is that it is a group of people with the banking cartel at the apex, then the oil cartel, and then the international corporations, the transnational corporations, and then the U.S. Intelligence organizations, the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, and a huge chunk of the American military. And they're all in it together. And you might say, well, where are they taking us? The end game is what they call a New World Order, which in plain English is a world government that is not elected, but is run by bankers and elite, an autocracy. To put it in its real form, it's a dictatorship, a world dictatorship. And that's the end game, and that's what they're moving toward. And they've been working on it for 50 years, and it's well advanced. And if something isn't done, they're going to get away with it. How powerful are they? Well, they are so powerful that they have taken over control of the United States. Neither the president nor the Congress is in control of the United States. The cabal is, and has been for years. They pick the presidents, and if they don't like them, they get rid of them. As President Clinton said in response to a question by White House reporter Sarah McClendon about why he didn't do something about UFO disclosure, he replied, and I quote, "Sarah, there is a government inside the government and I don't control it." Can you imagine? The President of the United States and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the United States doesn't control them and doesn't even know what most of them are doing, because they're doing it in secret. And that is the reason that there's foot dragging on global warming, because the cabal includes the electrical industry and the oil industry, and they don't want any change. They want the status quo. And they're willing to see the planet, our home, go up in flames rather than to allow some action to be taken. They control the free energy that we need. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that or not, but the same cabal owns the patents to free energy. And there are several different ways of going about that, but the most likely is what they call zero-point energy. Is the energy that's everywhere in the cosmos, and it's unlimited. So you don't have to pay for it, but you have to get some kind of a machine to be able to use it. And the patents they have are such that I am told, with a box about this square can generate enough electricity to run your whole home, or your car, or your tractor, or your airplane, or your ship, from a little box. You don't need to worry about ice storms anymore because you've got the power in the basement. And it could have been there long ago if it hadn't been for the fact that these people who are in control don't want to see any change. Well, I think that's sad because the situation on the climate front is so desperate that we have to do something about it immediately. In my light at the end of the tunnel, I said that I thought we had about 10 years to do something about it. I'm now in the new book that you're getting tonight, saying 7 years. Is it possible? Yes. But nobody's even talking about it, let alone the politicians who would have to make the decisions. In the book, I list some headlines. More drilling in the Beaufort Sea, more drilling in the Gulf of Mexico, new huge drilling off the coast of Newfoundland, extension of the oil sands. Headline after headline after headline of things that are being done that have a 20, 30, 40, 50-year life expectancy when our house is on fire now. And we've got to do something about it now. And what I'm proposing is that we mobilize and in 7 years do that. Install new clean energy in every car, truck, ship, plane, and house in the world. And it's possible. How? Well, just by first of all getting the president to declare freedom of access to the technology that is necessary by presidential order, which he can do, and then to do the opposite of what we did in World War II. I remember it very well. All of our car plants, all of our factories for refrigerators, and washing machines, and all of those goods were converted to armaments. And it was done very quickly. And we all worked together, and all of these things happened together in a common cause because we thought that our freedom was under attack and we had to do something about it. So we did it, and we made it happen. Well, we have to do exactly the same thing in reverse today as far as global warming is concerned, because if we don't, it could mean terrible, terrible trouble for the human species. And who knows how bad, but very bad, and it's somewhere we don't want to go. And it isn't necessary, but it means that we're going to have to change our policies very quickly and reverse most of the policies of the last 50 years. Well, the cabal is also responsible for the war on terrorism. The cabal is also AKA military-industrial complex. Dr. Carol Rosen, a friend of mine, worked with Dr. Werner von Braun, who was one of the Nazi scientists who came to work in the United States at the end of the war, and who mellowed as he got older, and said the industrial military complex has to have an enemy to justify all of this money they're spending on killing machines. So they have to have an enemy, and if they don't have one, they have to manufacture one. And he said first it will be the communists, and then it will be the terrorists, and then it will be the extraterrestrials. And that's exactly the way it's unfolding. They have helped create each of these threats, one after the other. And they have created a cult of lying. in the United States. It began with the Roswell Crashes. There were actually two, but one of them was the one that got in the news and got people thinking about flying saucers. And the day that the Roswell crash occurred, the base commander put out a press release that it was a flying saucer. Later that afternoon, his boss put out another press release saying, no, that was a mistake. It wasn't really a flying saucer. It was a weather balloon. Yeah, a weather balloon. And that was the beginning. And it's been ever since that, it's been denial. And they have absolutely kept from all of us and from the American taxpayers who are paying trillions of dollars for this stuff. All of the back engineering that's been done over the last 60 years, some of it which is useful and which we use on a day-to-day basis, but more important, a lot of it that has been used to create absolutely terrible weapons and flying saucers. The Americans now have their own. And their plan, after they get through with the terrorists, if they ever do, is to stage a mock attack in order to get the people of the United States to accept martial law as the onset of the New World Order. It's just, happily, some of us are beginning to talk about that sort of thing, and people are saying, you're kidding me, and I said, no, I'm not kidding you. But if it happens, just say, wave at them, and say, we know you're playing games with us, and we're not going to go along with it. We're going to stand up for our rights. So, and then of course, the ultimate deception, based on the same thing of lying, 9/11, I'm not going to talk about it tonight because I don't have time, but it's in the book. Probably the most monstrous deception, one of the most monstrous deceptions in the history of the world. And with consequences that are so absolutely fantastic. And what we're talking about here are two worlds, the one we sort of live in and the real one. And the one we live in is a couple of amateur Arab pilots came over and brought down two World Trade Centers, when in fact they didn't have the capacity to bring down even one. And there were 7 buildings came down that day, not just 2. And my book will tell you a lot about the others and also point you in the direction of where you can get the kind of evidence that you need to make up your own minds. So all of this has been pre-planned. A lot of it, the project for a new American century was written by the Pentagon, part of the cabal, and where they said it was a drastic thing. They wanted to have 3 or 4 wars in the Middle East, and they needed an excuse to get the American people to accept it, so they needed something to happen comparable to Pearl Harbor. Well, they got it. And they used it as an excuse, and whereas there were only a few terrorists at that time, not more than could be handled by police and intelligence means, they took advantage of this terrible act to start the war in Iraq. And as soon as they started dropping bombs on Baghdad, they started creating terrorists by the thousands. Whereas before there was only a handful, and it's never stopped. So what did it do? Of course, it set race against race, religion against religion, and then after that, the Patriot Act, all the loss of our civil rights, and it perverted NATO from a defensive pact, which had been very successful for all of my lifetime, into an effective task force, and it's a tragedy. And ISIS is just the illegitimate child of the foreign policy that brought that about. Well, finally, it has to be stopped before it's too late. I have a chapter in the book called Action Plan Necessary for the Redemption of America and Humankind. And take a look at the list, see what you agree with, and then try and pressure your politicians to adopt policies like that in order to do something. And the final thing in the book is the postscript, where I say that spirituality is the missing link. And it is. There was a time when Americans feared God, we did too, but in the post-war period, we have worshipped money. Money, power, and greed. And those have been the operative words. And so we think of nothing else except, how can you make another buck? And we have to change. There's some wonderful things that are going on. There's some wonderful people in the world who are doing wonderful things. And more power to them. But what they need is the same thing 1,000 times over. We have to have a tsunami, as I call it, of changed lives, of people who are willing to put their lives on the line for what they believe and to change the world in that way. So the book ends with some good news stories, and they offer encouragement. And we want to get together and to make sure that in the days ahead, there are not just a few good news stories, that there are thousands of them. And if we work collectively, if we're of one mind and really go all out, then there's a chance that we can rescue our planet before it gets in very, very deep, well, it's in deep trouble now, but to rescue it and bring it back and have it serve future generations to come, which is what we all want. Thank you.